How do you define great leadership?
I think everybody will have a slightly different view. So I think it's about a vision and a purpose and knowing where you're going and taking people with you.
How do you make sure you're prepared and planned in the best way possible to make sure that when things are inevitably going to go wrong, you're cool, calm, and you're also going to be delivering the right message to the people that need to hear it?
The Glasgow airport terrorist attack, I was the communications director for the group of airports that we had in Scotland at that time. I got a phone call and he said, we've got a report that Glasgow airport's on fire. My judgment at the time was we didn't spend enough time caring about the airports. Some of the head office team didn't spend any time at an airport. And so I basically said to my team, well, we're just going to go back to basics. And that work helped mitigate some of the hostility that came around when you had a crisis.
If you don't mind, I'd love to touch upon Dunblane. I read a piece that you wrote almost 10 years ago now for the 20th anniversary talking about the flowers of Snowdrops.
You know, I've talked about the guilt. What right do I have to feel this way about an event that didn't kill any of my children? I went to that school, and I guess what I do with a sort of limited platform that I have is that I make sure that every time the anniversary comes around that people remember.
Malcolm Robertson, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
You refreshed after your weekend?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You've been up in the Cairngorms exploring?
Yeah, I was in the Cairngorms for 2 days. One day up high, which was uncomfortable, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And then the second day, I just spent a bit of time walking about the forest
Yeah.
in 𝐫𝐞𝐜𝐨𝐦𝐦𝐞𝐧𝐝, which is somewhere that I grew up going on holiday
Amazing.
down the road. So yeah, so definitely, that's all part of, it's part of a plan. Basically, I like to go and do things like that the weekend to set me up for the week.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that a little bit because I know that's a massive part of your life. But yeah, I think the weather here in Edinburgh at the moment is not reliable or very nice, so I can only imagine it's a little bit more extreme when you're up there.
Yeah, it's a bit more. I mean, it's a bit more predictable at this time of year because you know it's going to be pretty wild, and you have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I got a bit of everything on Saturday, certainly, which was good.
Well, listen, we'll get into quite a lot today, and I'm really excited by the chat. We've got to know each other a little bit over the last year or so, and there's so many parts of your story and your journey that I want to get into. But with this being the Leaders Unlocked podcast, I want to start with maybe an easy question, maybe not, but how do you define great leadership?
I don't think it is an easy question at all, and I think everybody will have a slightly different view. And I've learned an awful lot over the years from good leaders and from not so good leaders. And it's not, I don't think of my leadership certainly as just being something that's just absolutely set. It's going to be like this, and I think it evolves and it changes as the circumstances do. But I think it's about a vision and a purpose. It's about taking people with you. So I've been around people who are quite good at leading people, right up until the point that they understand that the person that's in the leadership position doesn't actually know where they're going. So I think it's about a vision and a purpose and knowing where you're going and taking people with you. It's all very well saying this is where I'm going and I'm going to get there, but you need to always be providing the encouragement, the support, and the inspiration. I think to help bring people on that journey.
Brilliant. I think it's a great answer. Growing up, and you're proud Scot.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot around that as well. And you grew up, and you're probably closer to someone in terms of your father. Your father was Lord George Robertson, or is Lord George Robertson. And he was obviously in a very public role. You talk a little bit around, I guess, first of all, some of the core memories for yourself growing up, but then also how maybe that influenced yourself as a child, then over the years, and then maybe the leader that you are now.
Yeah. I think, I'm incredibly proud of everything that my dad's done. I think like most children of politicians, you would maybe look back and think I wish I'd seen more of them. But I think what we had a very keen sense of, that the dad was off doing something that he cared about, and that was for more than just him.
Yeah.
So it was that sort of relentless purpose. I think one of the most, I think, I was a difficult child. I was a difficult teenager, and I've made all my apologies. And
you elaborate?
There's plenty of people in my life that could elaborate, but I wasn't. I wasn't a model teenager. I was really, I was difficult, and I don't know if that was some kind of rebellion against the fact that my dad was in a public position. I constantly had to prove that I was not necessarily him. I think it's interesting that the children of politicians often just that there's an assumption that you think everything that your dad thinks, and that's nonsense in every way.
Yeah. And when you're growing up, how conscious were you of what was your normal, but that was very unnormal for everybody around you?
Yeah. I don't know, because I only ever knew that.
Yeah.
And, it was slightly different from my brother and sister, I suppose, because they were just born into it. I hadn't really known anything else. My dad became a member of parliament when he was 32. I was just tiny at that point. So I didn't really know any different. What I did know was that he was completely grounded and completely normal. Had a great way with people. He was popular in the constituency he represented. He was popular in the town. So he was just he was a good person. So in that respect, I don't think by my closest friends I was treated any differently. It was just that my dad was just at a slightly different job. He was on the TV occasionally.
Yeah.
And that he lived in London most of the week, whereas everybody else's parents came home in the evening.
And again, you've gone on and had an amazing career. You've been in very senior roles in big private and public companies. And now obviously you run your own business as well. Over the course of that time frame, is he somebody you have lent upon and asked for advice and some wisdom here and there? How's that relationship evolved from a leadership or mentor perspective?
Yeah, definitely. And just the fact that he's there whenever you need him is brilliant, and also just the breadth of experience that he's had. If you think about the career of a politician, you're not necessarily in a leadership position until you suddenly are. So I often reflect that when I'm talking to politicians now who may at some point in the future become government ministers, and they're maybe thinking, how do I do this? Yeah, I make the point, maybe slightly flippantly, that one day my father was the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. He was in opposition. He was the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland. The following day, he was the political leader of the armed forces, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. They didn't screw it up. And we have a bit of a laugh. We have a bit of a laugh about that. I said that
was a long way in politics.
Exactly. I said that to him recently, and he laughed and said, "Yeah," and we really didn't.
Yeah.
We did a good job. So I think suddenly, leadership can just happen suddenly. But he's had some brilliant experiences, and he's really good at passing on little pieces of wisdom. And some of the things that I talk about in my life and in my business are things that I've learned from him, things that he said to me, or so-and-so said to me once, this profound thing, and and it sticks with me. I think one of the things, just going back to being a difficult teenager, I was in the Scouts, and I was an assistant patrol leader, and at that time, being an assistant patrol leader, it was almost like you got to a certain age and stage, and the number of boys that were in the Dunblane Scout group was relatively small. And a vacancy arose for a patrol leader, and I just thought that there's absolutely no chance it'll be me, because I'm just, the biggest pain in the ass in the room, and I'm quite, I can be quite disruptive. I'm not necessarily a rule follower. And there's a bunch of guys, my peer group, who are way ahead of me in terms of, skill, manners, all of that stuff. And I got it. and I was absolutely blown away.
Wow.
And I think it's only in retrospect you look back and you think somebody somewhere saw in me the potential to change by giving me giving me leadership responsibilities.
Yeah.
Maybe when I wasn't necessarily ready for them.
Yeah.
And that it would maybe straighten me out and sort me out.
So talk me through that then.
And it was just such a brilliant feeling. I mean, there was a bit of embarrassment, because I felt that there were boys in that group who deserved it more than I did. Who were better young people than me. But it wasn't until later in life when I was like, I go and speak to schools occasionally just talk about the journey that I've had and the lessons that I've learned. And that's one moment where I think I look back and with a bit of gratitude for the leaders of that group who had obviously come together to say, well, actually, let's give it to Malcolm. Because I think just giving him that leadership responsibility will change him in a positive way. And it did.
Brilliant. And what age were you then?
I don't know, maybe 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah.
And it definitely had a big impact. And it also, it still influences me now in terms of, I coached a school football team, a primary school football team for a long time. And I coached little, 4, 5 and 6 year olds at a club in Edinburgh for a while. And just little things like that sometimes, the more disruptive elements, they just need a bit more responsibility.
Yeah.
And sometimes just giving them that makes you stand a bit taller. It just changes the way you think, changes the way you behave.
Yeah.
So just these wee lessons that that's and at the time it's just like, I went home and said to my parents, I said, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Why on earth have they given it to me?
Yeah.
All of the evidence suggests I would be the last person they would choose.
I know.
But they did. And that was because they had, I think it was a really clever move on their part.
Yeah.
If it was calculated, and I'm sure it must have been.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly it probably was, but it is funny how all of a sudden you're in a leadership role of sorts, and you recognise straight away that the behaviour that you were kind of showing will need to change instantly because people are going to be watching you and following you. So I can totally imagine how that was a kind of a shot between the eyes in terms of buck up your ideas, and that could have gone either way for the person who thought, right, Malcolm's got something about it.
Could have been a disaster.
Could have been anarchy, but it's interesting. So like, how did that then start shaping when in those years of, your most formative years of whether it's 13, 14 through to your 18, 19, how did that start fueling ideas and career aspirations for you?
I think if it did, it was subconscious because I took my foot off the gas. I did pretty well in my O grades, which are now Nat 5s. And then I didn't do very well academically at school after that. I just had so many distractions, which we all know, are in the way of teenagers. Thankfully, I didn't have, social media and a phone that was useful. But I wasn't, I didn't apply myself at school. So the theme that ran through all of my reports was must try harder. And every time
I think we had the same reports.
Every time, and I'm assuming that I still get them from the team.
Yeah.
But I remember my mum coming home from parents' nights, and I was, after I'd emerged from wherever I was hiding, she would say the same thing over and over again, which was he's got the ability, he's got the intelligence, but he just doesn't apply himself. And that happened all the way through school. I had a vague notion that I might want to be a journalist. I'd wanted to be a photographer at some point, and I'd spent some time with a freelance professional photographer who had talked me out of that. Didn't see any future in it. I'm not sure he was right, but I was talked out of that. And then I drifted around, and I left school aged 17, so I was quite young for my year. I left school aged 17 with 3 hires, 3 C's in English, French and history, which were pretty useless at the time. And, I ended up just the only option, and I say this when I go and do this talk that I do at schools, I start by saying, here's my journey, and I started work at the age of 17 because I'd given myself no other option. And sometimes it's just a case of, you either learn the easy way or you learn a slightly more difficult way. And I ended up just starting at in a very clerical position in a United Distillers in Edinburgh.
Okay.
Where I did everything from sit on the reception desk and greet visitors to answer the phone to delivering the mail to just anything that you need to get done.
You talked around that, almost that milestone of in terms of your memory of being in the Scouts. Over the next years of your career, what's kind of the next anchor that you can kind of call upon that shaped who you then became and the journey that you went on? Is there another one that you can kind of pull out at all?
I don't think so. I think I learned a lot. Even in those early years of work, and I was a fish out of water, right? I'd gone from living in quiet little Dunblane, where I had a 10-minute walk to school. If I chose to go home at lunchtime, there'd be a 5 beans and chips sitting on the table. It was unbelievably easy. And maybe that's why I just got so relaxed about things, because everything was quite quiet and straightforward and easy. And then all of a sudden I was having to commute to Edinburgh. I'd sort of rediscovered this shyness that I'd been struck with, as I went from primary school into secondary school. So I became quite shy again because I was out in the world. I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
I always remember, the first few times I got the train to Haymarket to get off to get to Murrayfield, which is where United Distillers was based at the time. I wouldn't get the bus because I didn't know how to get a bus, because I'd never used a bus. And I was just going to be surrounded by people that knew what they were doing and who I didn't know. So I would walk 30 minutes on it was just making things so much worse.
Yeah.
And then I eventually got a car, and my parents helped me get a car, and that made life a bit easier. There was a couple of guys who are still great friends now who were doing the same commute, so we all travelled together and had a bit of a laugh. But I remember thinking that this is really hard.
Yeah.
Maybe feeling a bit sorry for myself.
Yeah.
I was still quite young. I look at I've got a 17-year-old myself, and I look at him and think, would he be ready to just be put into that environment? Probably not. So all of a sudden I was there, I was turning up in a big office, lots of people doing serious things, everybody dressed in a different way. I had one really bad double-breasted suit, a couple of shirts and a paisley pattern tie that I seemed to wear every day. And then I think there was there was a moment at which I thought, well, I just need to make the most of this opportunity, and I just need to learn as much as I possibly can. And if this is my job on a certain day, I'm just going to do it really, really well.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was on the reception desk. You'd be sitting there in the morning, and just little things like I had a telephone directory of everybody in the building and their name, their job title. And if I'm just going to get to know everybody in this building, and I'm going to greet them in the morning by their name. Just simple things like that. I'm just going to, if I've got to sit here, I'm not just going to sit and look at the Monarch of the Glen all day, which was quite nice sitting under that painting. But I'm actually going to make the most of the time that I've got here. So I just learned about the people in the building, what they did, started to show an interest in the various job titles that were around. Got to know the more regular visitors, so there was quite often guys coming in who were selling bottles or packaging or whatever, and I got to know them and their business, and I got to understand the connectivity between them and the people that they were there to see. So I would look at, who's that person? He keeps coming in to see this guy. What does he do? How did he become that? So there was a curiosity there.
Yeah, but also a real, I guess, holding yourself accountable to you get uncomfortable as well. Of like, it's easy to, if you move city or move roles or whatever, in terms of wait for people to come to you and be that kind of shrinking violet. But I think being on the front foot, and I've seen it in your work, and you're undoubtedly an amazing people person, but being inquisitive, because everybody's got a story and everybody's got an incredible personality somewhere in them. So it's being able to uncover that.
Curiosity is the most amazing thing. I talk to everybody that comes in to work for us. It's like, be curious, ask questions. You don't ever learn anything if you don't ask questions. And I still love learning about stuff. Over the weekend in the Cairngorms, the guide that we had, Stevie Boyle from Ocean Vertical, absolutely brilliant, knows everything about everything, nature-wise, mountain-wise, and all of that. And I'm constantly just hoovering up stuff. And it's the same when when I meet you guys, and you meet anybody, it's like, what do you talk about? Well, you talk about them.
I know.
You don't talk about yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's been the biggest motivating factor for me to start this, because I'm ultra curious, and because people have got amazing stories, and
they do.
Selfishly, I like to download it and learn and myself, but I also know that there's going to be nuggets in there that people can take from. I think there's so much we can cover in terms of themes. Like today, you obviously now run Charlotte Street Partners, your own business, one of the most reputable in the UK in terms of public relations, communications, crisis management. So there's a lot of different things I'd want to get into. But if we fast forward to a role where you're in a real, I guess, the deep end, if you like, in public facing. So you were director of communications for Heathrow.
Yeah.
Talk to me just first of all what that role looked like, and at its most intense, because I think there's a lot of different themes to get into, but I think this is where, if people start a business, particularly in services, when the client you're working with wants to know that you've been there and done it.
Yeah.
And I think this role that you've been in, you can kind of say, I've done it. So you talk me a little bit around what that role was like.
Well, I was at BAA, which is which was the privatised British Airports Authority, and I was there for 12 years, and I often reflect that I got about 30 years of experience in that time, an embarrassment of riches, if you think about crisis communication and managing issues, is highly political, a regulated business, from a safety perspective, but also when I went down south from an economic perspective. And then, every major crisis that you would associate with Heathrow over the last, 20 years pretty much happened while I was there. I spent more time in Scotland in the airport business, and I had a bit of experience, the Glasgow airport terrorist attack. I was the communications director for the group of airports that we had in Scotland at that time. So I took the first call from the media on that incident, which was, as intense as these things get.
So how does that play out then in your role, like from it happening, and what's the timeline there in terms of?
And these airports are just such public things, they're filled with people all of the time. So there's no hiding place for the business. What happened there was, I was, our middle son, my son James, he was just a few months old, I think, at the time. And Jane and I had a very rare day out without him. And we'd gone into Edinburgh and having lunch and doing a bit of shopping. And I got a phone call from a guy called Derek Lambie, who then was the editor of the Sunday Express. Okay. And he said, we've got a report that Glasgow Airport's on fire. And at the time I said, well, I doubt it. I'd probably know about it if it was, but let me get back to you. And I made a call to the airport. And the reaction I got from the guy that I spoke to suggested that the airport was on fire.
Right.
So I phoned Derek back and said, I think you might be right, but I don't know the facts. I'll need to establish the facts, and we'll keep you posted. And then from then on, it was just a taxi up the road. And I think for the purposes of telling the story in the future, I think I took or made something like 300 telephone calls in the next 4 hours. Which, if you think about it, is just almost impossible to manage. So it was just absolutely constant. And only the following morning was I able to actually get out of my house, away from my desk, and to the airport. So we had a team on the airport.
Is that you fielding calls? Just everybody wanting to speak to you, or is it a combination of
hundreds and hundreds of inbound calls from everywhere in the world?
Primarily just media outlets,
media.
just what's going on?
Mainly media, but then you throw in, shareholders, people from elsewhere in the group, politicians, just everybody coming into you, and and it's just like you're just basically thinking on your feet. There's a bit of adrenaline keeps you going, and then and I went I went down south initially on a sort of part-time basis. The company had been acquired, and they were going through a really difficult transition from being a PLC to being a privately held company. I think even the shareholders would accept now that they probably didn't do enough in the early days. And there were 2 or 3 big events that happened around that time that made things really difficult. So there was 3 of us asked to go from Scotland to London just to help out. I described it as a kind of stop the bleeding. And when you've stopped the bleeding, you can start to think about what the recovery looked like. So I went down with these 2 other guys. There was an HR guy and an operational guy, and we just tried to help out. And then I moved to, I was the deputy communications director for a long time, and then I became the comms director. And we had to deal with the opening of T5, which was fairly well publicised. The royal opening was nice and easy because there were no passengers. We just had to deal with the Queen. But the operational opening was really quite difficult. We had volcanic ash cloud stuff. We had weather-related incidents. We had select committee investigations. We had regulatory interventions. There was a competition review going on in the background, which would ultimately break the company up. So in terms of the issues that we had, it was just everything all at once. So it was an incredible training ground. There was one day I was sitting at my desk and somebody drew my attention to the live TV feed in the office, and there was I think it was a Greenpeace protester abseiling down the front of the House of Commons with a banner that read BAA headquarters. And because the Green lobby thought that we had the government in our pockets, which couldn't have been further from the truth. But I looked up, and without being blasé about it, the first thing I thought was that's the wrong logo. We've changed our logo since then. So maybe somebody should send Greenpeace the updated brand guidelines, and that's frustrating. But in the hierarchy of the things that we were dealing with, having that was just a distraction. That I'll give a 1-sentence comment in media, and then we'll move back to the things that people actually care about.
For sure, it's interesting that it's most companies. You talk around trying to be proactive, and ahead of things. And in your role there, I guess it's the real epitome of being really reactive, of things coming in. And there's obviously going to be a balance, but as you said, your phone's ringing there 300 times in the matter of an afternoon, and you are going to be reactive. How do you make sure you're prepared and planned in the best way possible to make sure that when things are inevitably going to go wrong, you're cool, calm, and you're also going to be delivering the right message to the people that need to hear it?
I mean, it's a kind of core element of what we do now.
Of course.
So, if your house goes on fire, you'll phone the fire service and they'll come and put the flames out, but you'll still be left with a damaged house. They talk and we talk about prevention. And the way you do that is by building your reputation in the good times, in the knowledge that the bad times will come along. So yes, we were reactive, but I think we became very reflective, and we became much better at managing the reputation in the lulls between the crises, because you knew that when you're operating, certainly Heathrow having spent a bit of time with the operational team, the guys that run the place on a daily basis, it's a miracle that they get from one end of the day to the other end of the day without something very significant happening. So it is it's an extremely hard job. But I think for me, there was a bit about being focused on the right things. So when I first went to London and talked to the public affairs team, what are you talking about? What are you out talking to politicians about? Airport customer service didn't appear on the list anywhere.
Right.
It was runway capacity. It was about climate change. It was all important issues. And my argument was, we have no credibility on any of these issues until we can prove that we care about running our airports better than we do right now. So a large part of your reputation is determined by how well you do what you're there to do. And my judgment at the time was, we didn't spend enough time caring about the airports. We didn't spend some of the head office team didn't spend any time at an airport. We weren't as close to the customers, be those passengers or airlines, and there was always a big confusion in our business about who's the customer. Is it the passenger or the airline, as if it couldn't be both of those. And so I basically said to my team, well, we're just going to go back to basics, and we're just going to go and spend the next 6 months talking to our stakeholders, mainly politicians, about what we're doing to fix the airports, and which are not, performing as well as they could do. So, yeah. So and that work helped mitigate some of the hostility that came around when you had a crisis, because people had much more of an understanding of how these airports functioned, and the challenges that we face day in, day out. So it was a bit of just educating people, not just saying, come and have a look at us because it's really, really hard, but come and we'll show you how it all operates. I used to go up the control tower at Heathrow to show people what Heathrow was, and it was a bit of a mess. If you ever wondered why it took you ages to get from the gate to the runway, you just go up that control tower and have a look down and see the reversing and the cul-de-sacs. And I think one of the problems with that place is that every time they needed a bit more terminal capacity, they built a bit more terminal capacity. There was nobody ever taking that long-term strategic view of, like, well, this place is only going to get busier and busier.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that in terms of like the inside, the core of the team, both you were leading and you were part of at a more senior level. You kind of touched upon it there, but in terms of that strategy and what you're part of, and in terms of almost the plan and you're delivering, and what that looked like in terms of the team you're over. It's high stress, very public facing. Obviously, you've got the stakeholders and politicians all looking in as well. What does that look like in terms of that team and the strength of that, and being all on the same page and delivering the same messages?
There was a consistency about the team in terms of the people, and we were all in it together, and it was a really brilliant team. I'm still good friends with some, if not, most of them. So it really was a team effort, and we just became so used to it that when a crisis happened, when we got the phone call to say, look, something's happened, we were able to judge whether it was going to become a crisis or not. We all knew our roles. We were good. There was a maturity about the division of responsibility. So I never, I wasn't necessarily having to say, right, you do that, you do that, you do that. There were 2 or 3 of us in senior leadership positions, and we just worked really, really well.
How did you form that then? Because it's easy to say that, and people listening to this, whether they're part of a team or part of a leadership team, getting people facing in the right direction is, you kind of said it in your first answer of the day, in terms of take people on a journey and take people with you. How did you go around doing that? How did you?
I think it was finding the time, making the time to think beyond the immediate.
Yeah.
So being able to look up and over what's in front of you and imagine, like I've sometimes listened to golfers talking about how golf doesn't seem to apply to me, But if you imagine the shot you're going to play,
then
it's much easier to actually execute it. Like quite often I'll hit a golf ball and think that's definitely not how I imagined that was going to go. But I think there was for me, I think one of the things that I look back on and think I became a really reflective person, quite a deep thinker. So you're finding the moments to reflect on your individual performance. Am I behaving well? Am I doing well here? Am I making the right decisions? Having a bit of external perspective around me, putting external perspective around me to give me that. So not only people who do what I do now in terms of agency support, but also just people in my life that were able to say you might want to think about doing things slightly differently. So for that Heathrow team, I think for quite a lot of it, it was this crisis will be over. It will be over soon. We have to be absolutely focused on the here and now. We have to be, empathetic and on the side of our customers and passengers mainly. But we're going to get through this. And, we have a choice. Do we come through it, stronger than we went in, or do we not? And so I think I became better in that period of my life at imagining, right, 3-4 days down the line, we'll probably be out of this. And then you can work back from there. So what does that look like? What are the things that we need to do? And I think it was the same with my career, that I guess one of the most significant interventions in my career was from one of these assessment centres that you get sent on when you work for a big company. And I had a boss, an absolutely brilliant boss, but he was an ex-journalist. He was very close to the end of his career, and I was going to succeed him and all of that. And he said, look, there's a 3D assessment centre. And he said, you need to go on it. It's compulsory. And I always remember he said, it'll be shit, but you need to go on it. And so I was, 32, I think I was at the time, quite gallus. I was like, yeah, probably will be rubbish. And I went there, and it was it just changed everything in terms of being able to look into the future and imagine the future. And I still do it now. I still have my life broken down into sort of 10-year.
So how did they do that?
They basically said, look, I think they took the edge off me in maybe the swagger that I went in with. I didn't leave with the same poise. I was 32. I was doing really well. I was communications director for 3 airports in Scotland, running a team of about 10. And they basically, the starting point was, yeah, you're doing okay, but what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Because you've probably got as much time in work as you've been alive. What are you doing with the rest of your life? And I remember thinking at the time, I haven't got a clue. I don't really know. I'm on a journey, and I'll see what happens. And what they made us do, and if my team are watching this, some of them will just be have their head in their hands. But basically, they made us draw a line across a piece of paper, and on the left hand side, it was like they put an age, like 15 or 18 or whatever. So I put 15 down, and on the right hand side of the page, you've got the age at which you would like to retire. So I put 40. I didn't. I put the national retirement age, and then it was just like, what job do you want to do next? Just imagine the job you want to do. And it was easy in a big company because I was able to say, well, actually, I know what all the jobs are that I would quite like to do. And if you're not in that position, it is slightly harder. But what that taught me was, okay, that's the next step, and these are the things that I need to do to achieve that. But I can also look above that and beyond that and think, well, actually, there's 2 steps beyond that I would quite like to do. So what are the things that I would need to pick up along the way in order for me to achieve job number 2 and job number 3? And, I always remember I ran out of jobs in the company that I would like to do. And they were saying, but what are you going to do after that? And I was like, I don't know. So I just wrote down set up my own business.
Yeah.
And I made it up. I had no intention at that time in my life
Right.
of setting up my own business, but I just had to think of something, so I just put it down. And what I say to people when I'm trying to encourage them to do that exercise, which is why the team would have their heads in my hand, is that everything I put down on that piece of paper that day came true. And it didn't come true because I wrote it down on a piece of paper. It came true because it changed the way I thought about my life. It gave me a bit of momentum. It gave me a longer term aim, objectives, and it just that and that reflection as well. So actually, I went back from that 3-day assessment centre that I was told would be terrible. Thinking it was profound actually. The difference in me, and also it applies as much to your personal life as it does. And it's not about wishing your life away. It's just about having a little bit more of an order.
Totally.
And I found that as you talked about an anchor. You know, at the end of the first year of the pandemic, I'd hit a brick wall basically, and you know, I was low in energy. I was low in mood. I wasn't a great person to be around, so I took myself out of the.
This is in your business.
This is in the business I'm in at the moment. Took myself out of the day-to-day for a while, and I was just chatting to a woman about how I felt and, you know, how it was all going, and I told her that story that I've just told you about. And as I was getting towards the tail end of it, I could see the pennies dropping in her mind, and I could predict what she was about to say.
Because of the paper.
She said, "That's really interesting. What's on your plan now?"
Yeah.
And I wasn't one.
Yeah.
And so lo and behold, I'd just become detached. I was alone. I was adrift.
Yeah.
So that was a point at which I thought, right, there needs to be another plan. And I've got, you know, I'm in my early 50s and I've got something that resembles the same kind of plan that takes me, you know, 10 years down the line.
But I think it's so important, and I say this from a position of not doing it regularly enough myself, because everybody's on that treadmill, aren't they? Of just running hard and year on year, quarter on quarter.
Day to day, existing, surviving.
Whereas like taking a pause and being able to kind of look up and think, why am I doing this and where am I trying to work towards? It can have a bit of that realization. So I think you might inspire a few people to get a bit of A4 paper out there.
Get a bit of paper out. If you want to come and talk to me, I'll bore the backside off you.
But no, it's great. I wanted to touch upon something you said there, and it's around the personal side, because everybody handles stress in a different way. And I think you maybe touched upon it in terms of the way you're communicating to your team and saying, this will pass, or in 4 days, this crisis will pass. And that takes a real skill, and also using perspective and being here before and that experience. But how did maybe some of those most challenging and stressful moments then impact the Malcolm at home, the dad, the husband? How does that kind of materialize, and has it changed over the years as you've gained more scars and scar tissue?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of. I sometimes reflect that I became addicted to adrenaline, really, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I was also aware that I was completely engrossed in it. You know, you can't have that type of job and not be 7 days a week, and sometimes it's the middle of the night. So I probably wasn't especially easy to be around. You know, I spent most of my week at Heathrow or around London, and then I spent Friday locked away in my room, demanding that there was silence outside it. And then Saturdays and Sundays were usually just you were at the mercy of whatever was happening. So yeah, I think, you know, I've not been, you know, it's been quite challenging for those around me, and I'm conscious of, you know, I'm much more conscious of that.
Just thinking, again, it's just from the conversation I've had today, has it ever resonated with the fact that you're almost in a very similar situation to your father there, in terms of London 5 days a week? Yeah. Has that kind of ever hit you, or you reflected upon that in terms of?
Yeah, I think in my mind I was only ever going to do it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
The novelty wears off. London's a great place to be. The job was absolutely amazing. You know, it was like a roller coaster. You didn't know when to get off, because you could see some twist or turn ahead of you. But when I made my decision to stop doing it, it was final,
Mm-hmm.
and it was immediate.
And what were the why? What's the why behind that?
I think there had been one crisis in the winter of 2010 where I felt the organisation, despite all of the, almost all of the rehearsals that we'd had,
Yeah.
I think the organisation didn't live up to, the standards that people would have expected at the time. I think the organisation turned in on itself a bit. There was a bit more blame being thrown around the team. There was a big commission, a big investigation that everybody had to appear in front of, almost like a select committee. So it was adversarial. And I think I described it as at the time as being, I said, I've just done it, 3, 4, 5 times now. You nearly get to the top of the mountain, and you slide all the way back down to the bottom. Then you go again, and then you go again, and then you get to the point where you think, well, I'll go and try another mountain.
Yeah.
Just go and try something different.
Yeah.
So it wasn't it wasn't a falling out. It was just a very rational. I went home it was at Christmas time, and I went home at Christmas, and I thought myself, and I went to my boss at the time, the chief executive, who was very understanding, and just basically said, my heart's not in it anymore. I've lost the kind of hunger to be that person that's defending this organisation day in, day out, sometimes when it's ridiculous to do so.
Yeah.
And you need somebody in that position who's been like me over the last few years, which is a dogged defender of the organisation. If my heart's not in it, you need somebody that you maybe just need somebody that's fresh and new and not as cynical as I have become.
Yeah.
But
we'll come on to it, but I think a core part of whether it's crisis management, but also that communication side, you were the face and the throat to choke, if you like, for all media outlets. Whether it's you're facing off to the BBC, Downing Street and things. When you're in a crisis like that, and a journalist or presenter's got a microphone, under your mouth, and a camera, what's some of the key messages or key for whether it's people listen to this in crisis, whether it's a mini crisis or a large crisis, in terms of just being able to communicate in the right way and to when you're handling that?
I think I say this a lot to clients. The chances are you will know an awful lot more than the person who's asking you the questions. So you have an intimate knowledge of your business that they don't have. And that's not to say that you should be relaxed about that, but it should give you some confidence. So I knew going into those most hostile interviews that I knew more than whoever it was that was talking to me, and and that wasn't something that that had just happened. I'd learned. I was sitting in these big operational meetings, so I knew intimately what was going on operationally and what was going to then happen in order to then inform the advice that we were given to the outside world, to passengers mainly. So I took a lot of confidence from knowing that I was going to have the facts at my fingertips, and they might not. So some of the really hard interviews could have been a lot harder had I not been as prepared as I was. And then there's just, they're going to try and catch you out.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They're going to try and trip you up. I mean, they were all. I mean, what people don't see is this super friendly conversation you have at the beginning and at the end when you're not being recorded. So I did I think it was a 7-minute interview for the PM program with Eddie Mair, who I regard as one of the best.
Yeah.
And most forensic interviewers that we've had in the media for years and years. And I had no time to prepare for Eddie Mair because I'd said, our strategy at the time, or part of our strategy at the time, was to accept every single radio opportunity, because we figured that radio was the best medium to get to as many people as we could. We pretty much accepted every TV request within reason, but we were accepting every radio request, and we had a studio, sort of makeshift studio that we were able to create every time there was a crisis. And I got hauled into this room, told it's Radio 4, put the headphones on, and this producer said, I'm just going to put you through to Eddie now. And I had that moment where I thought, oh, nobody told me it was bloody him.
Yeah, okay.
He comes on to the line. Malcolm, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. You must be having a horrendous time. It must be really, really busy. I can't thank you enough for making the time. And then he says, right, well, we get going now. And we got going, and he basically was like, we punched in the face for 7 minutes, and then it came to an end. And then he said, I can't, again, thank you so much for, and it was just the contrast. So, and then there's just little bits and pieces. I was doing a live interview into the BBC studio about 5 o'clock in the evening to what was then BBC News 24, which is just BBC News now, news channel. And I had an earpiece in, and there was nobody in front of me other than a camera and a camera operator. And as I was being counted down in my earpiece by the producer to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, at round about 3, the cameraman said something along the lines of, "There's a couple of million people watch this."
Thanks for that.
And I just sort of flashed into my head, and then I did the interview, and it was fine. It was just one of these kind of like, tell us what's going on. What's going on. There was a little bit of back and forward, but at the end of it, I sort of laughed. I had a bit of a laugh with him about it, and I just figured that, we were making these guys have a pretty miserable existence standing outside a hotel at Heathrow in the middle of winter in a snowstorm, freezing cold. He obviously thought he'd have a bit of fun with me at the time. And then there's also Eamon Holmes tried to catch me out with a bit of a curveball at the end of a conversation. And again, it was just speaking to him. He was on the sofa in the studio. I was standing what we called the grassy knoll outside the Renaissance Hotel at Heathrow. And I just explained everything that was going on. And then there's this technique that some of the better broadcasters use, whereas they almost try to get you to feel that the interview's done and over. And then they hit you with a sucker punch. And his was basically, he said you don't sound like you're from around Heathrow. I'm assuming you'll get home for Christmas. Because at that time, there was quite a lot of passengers stuck, and we didn't know if we would get them moving by Christmas. And that was the sucker punch. I didn't fall for it, but that's always be wary of.
Have your eyes wide open.
It's just until you take that earpiece out in the microphone, you can hear that the program's moved on. And I always remember that as I was taking the earpiece out, I heard him turn to his co-presenters and say, "He's a very serious man." But then I suppose he has to be.
Yeah.
So, job done.
Yeah, for
Job
sure.
done. And I didn't fall for that question at the end of
that. It still baffles me now, and maybe people are a little bit more on it now, but you hear about those situations where, is the phrase where the mic's still hot? Is that? Yeah. And obviously Gordon Brown.
Still on. Yeah,
still on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's a few of them, and you think like, okay, how'd you manage that crisis? But I want to say, you used the word earlier on in terms of when a bigger crisis hit, and you said no matter how much we'd rehearsed. What does that look like in terms of, are you always scenario planning and rehearsing what could go wrong, what will happen if it goes wrong, what will we do, or how does that look?
I guess what I meant was we'd had so many live rehearsals, so it happened so often that in between times we tended to do a kind of like, we would all sit down and reflect after the event. Sometimes we got professional facilitators in, sometimes we did it ourselves. So it was just making sure that as we went through one crisis, there were things that we'd learned that would influence the way that we dealt with whatever was going to happen next. So it was more about that, and but also just how did that make us feel? I think it was quite useful for people to have a moment after an intense event. So the Glasgow airport terrorist attack, for example, 48 hours of, in fact, probably longer than that, of just really, really hard, constant inbound, added to the fact that our place of work had been attacked. And, I remember afterwards talking to one of my team, and he was really emotional about it, and he couldn't really explain why. So I think that point that you made earlier about having actually done it and having actually felt it, the bit that you can only learn by being in it is how it makes you feel, and the emotional roller coaster that you're on. And quite often it's the adrenaline and the focus and the phone calls and the dealing with issues that keep you going. But I talk about being at Heathrow, absolutely, under the cosh, quite rightly, high pressure stuff. And I got a text from my mum that just said, "I hope you're okay."
Yeah.
And I nearly started crying there and then.
Yeah, mums will do that too.
Aye.
Yeah.
And it was just, I was like, wow. I wasn't ready for that. And I had to go away and just, right, I'm going to have a couple of minutes of just composing myself.
Yeah.
But again, it reminded me at the time that those that worked for us in the leadership positions, everybody was dealing with things in a different way. Some people are absolutely unbelievably good in a crisis.
Yeah.
Some people who you may expect to be really brilliant in a crisis are not. And they just fall apart. People are complex.
Yeah.
Everybody's different.
For sure. You don't know until you know.
And sometimes you don't know until it actually is right there in front of you. And quite a lot of the time, it's like deciding who's actually, you just go and focus on something else.
For sure.
Or just go home.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of our stuff. It was unusual when it would last like 4 or 5 days, and sometimes you didn't know when it was going to. So you were able to make sure that I was having to make sure that people were getting enough sleep.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think a lot of, whether you watch documentaries or podcasts and things, it's so easy when you speak to leaders and high performers, and you focus on the bright lights and the easy times. And I think high performance, and it's how you react when you actually don't know how you'll react. And almost being at the coal face and just figuring it out, and are you staying calm? So yeah, I think some unbelievable insight there, Malcolm. So take me to you've obviously decided, very self-aware of, you can't give your best to that role anymore. Are you then straight away thinking, okay, I want to have my name on the door, as it were, and set up your own business? Are you thinking back to that A4 bit of paper, or how's that kind of playing out when that?
No, in short, I made the decision to leave BAA with no plan. I just knew that it was time to go and do something else. I didn't know what that something else looked like. I did I tried to imagine. I didn't think I would miss the job. I would miss some of the people, but I didn't think I would miss the job, and I was right about that. But what I was going to miss, and I was absolutely sure I was going to miss, was that sense of excitement and adrenaline. And I remember that a few headhunters are in touch, and I'm sure the headhunters would agree with me. You have to sort of play the game of it.
Of course,
you have to engage.
I used to work in recruitment, and you got to play the game.
You have to. If you say no to absolutely everything, they just stop phoning you up about the really exciting ones. So I had to sort of feign interest in a few opportunities that were around at the time. But I remember thinking, I can't imagine anything more boring than that. So I didn't really know at all what I was going to do. I had a period of time off, towards the end of my time at BAA, I'd done everything I needed to do. My boss very kindly said, just go and take the summer to work out what you're going to do the rest of your life. So I did a little bit of scooting about Scotland, and and then suddenly I thought, right, I need to get my act together and think about what I'm going to do. And I started just going out, and I was getting dressed up. I was putting a suit, shirt, tie on again. So I'm going to dress like a business person today and be like a business person, to get myself back into character.
Yeah.
And taking all these people by surprise. So meeting people for a cup of coffee, and they're saying, so what are you all dressed up for? And I was saying, I'm meeting you.
Yeah.
And I need to get my head back in this game. And then one day I just I was phoned up by, the infrastructure fund that went on to buy Edinburgh Airport, and they just said, look, we're putting together an acquisition team. We're quite keen to buy Edinburgh Airport, and would have a conversation with you about potentially joining that team as a consultant. So in order for me to do that, I went to London, met the partner, really interesting guy. They said, yeah, happy for you to be working with us. I then had to set up a company in order for them to, have some commercial arrangement with me. I didn't know anything about that. So I was running about Edinburgh, talking to my pals who had done it before, saying, how'd you set a company up?
Yeah.
How'd you choose a bank?
Yeah.
How'd you do this? How'd you do that? They're just asking people for help, and everybody's really, really helpful. So basically set up a company in an afternoon, got a bank, and did that consultancy work for them. And, another client came in, and I thought, I quite like this. Sense of freedom.
Yeah.
A sense of ownership. I'd never, I'd never really had an entrepreneurial bone in my body. I still don't describe myself as an entrepreneur. I don't know why that is. You know David Duke?
Yep.
Funny story about David. I was speaking to Belinda Roberts' We Do group, and it was a dinner, and she'd sent out this big email saying, still a couple of places at the dinner talk with media entrepreneur Malcolm Robertson. And David screen grabbed it, sent it to me, and said, look, mate, there's a guy with the same name as you. And I still think that's hilarious, because I've never ever thought of myself. He's the only person that calls me it, and he's taking the piss when he does. But I think it just happened. I think I shared an office with a woman called Elena Torres, who is as entrepreneurial as the day is long, and was absolutely brilliant. And we were just like, she ran a private jet broker company. I think she still does. And we're still good pals. I credit her with keeping me going, because we just shared this little room in George Street, and it was just chat, bit of work, chat, and the few moments where I would say, this is all just a bit hard, I'm going to go back to just try and find a good in-house job. She was the one that was saying, no, don't. Stay with it and keep going. And then, so I did that for 2 years, and then I guess got a little bit lonely, and thought, well, what more could I make of this little company that's just me, a laptop, and a telephone.
And from that, was that Charlotte Street Partners then, or was that?
No, that was just I just had some random company name, and people contracted with me, and it was just me. And then there was a big piece of work came in from the Green Investment Bank that required me to hire a couple of people. So I just got a couple of freelancers, who were brilliant. Both of them, Debbie Byers being one, and Chris Sibbald, who's now doing brilliantly in London in our line of work. And the three of us worked on that team, and that was the sort of beginning of that process. Andrew Wilson, my former business partner, Andrew and I had been getting together a bit more in London. Turned out you cut a long story short, we pretty much wanted to do the same thing, which was to take a sort of London quality agency into Scotland. We just had a hunch that there was a gap in the market, but we did a lot more research ourselves than maybe people imagine we did. So that period where I'd hired this small team to help me with this bigger piece of work was really the sort of precursor to Charlotte Street Partners.
What was, again, because I came from a role previously in a large multinational corporate, and then came into the small business now and running that. What were the biggest differences that really opened your eyes from being a very senior executive to then being a founder? And what, talk me through that and some of the moments and realizations. Things like, how do you set up a bank? How do you set up a company? And it's interesting.
I don't know. I like to think I've always been pretty down to earth. You know, all my closest friends are still the guys that I went to school with in Dunblane. We all do different things. None of us really bother too much about what it is we do. So I was always fairly grounded. So it didn't bother me that we were the fact that we're building something from the bottom up, and that we were all just having to roll our sleeves up and do things that we might not have had to do in a previous life. But I think the thing that sticks with me now is, and I talk to the people that we bring into the business now, we're not ever going to be that big company culture. So all of the things that I disliked about big companies and the culture and the way that they manage people, and maybe they would argue that they do it by necessity because of the volume of people that they have, the amount of process that's around it, we'll never be that. You know, there's a very simple philosophy that you just treat people like grown-ups, and more often than not, they will respond and they will behave like grown-ups. And if they stop behaving like grown-ups, then you treat them slightly differently. But actually, you don't have to put your hand up to ask if you can go to the toilet. You don't have to fill in a form necessarily to take a half day to go and watch your children perform at a school, or to go look after a sick relative or that. You just let your colleagues know where you are.
I know.
And we all trust one another to get the job done. So as I'm quite proud of the fact that we're not that. We're not that big company culture, and we never will be.
But it's funny the way people listening to this thinking, that sounds so alien in terms of that, but it's just those small things of, you know, treat people like adults, but if you were them, how would you want to be treated? And I think that's definitely where you can unlock a great culture in a very easy way, rather than thinking about the scenarios and the environments you've been in that you liked and then didn't. But then the amazing sense of ownership to, I get to create this. I get to decide that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like liberating people and actually just understanding that they have a perspective. They're adults. They're intelligent.
And you get more back.
Yeah, you absolutely do. You think about how do I like to be motivated? If somebody came in to me every morning and said, I'm not that interested in what you had planned for the day. Do these 5 things. By lunchtime, you're demotivated, you're flat. And I think, you know, going back to a customer service environment, the people who are on the front line understand what your customers want and what your customers like and what they don't like better than people like me. So even now, I like to talk to the team at the sharp end, the ones that are having the client engagements every day. How are we doing? Because they know what clients like and you know, as I say, what they don't like better than I do. And it is alien, but why should it be? You know, I remember in various leadership styles that you would get in the big companies, it would be parent and child. And you think about it, doesn't even work with a child. You know, if you just bark at your child to do something, they tend not to do it. But if you actually sit down and explain, this is the bigger reason that I want you to do this thing. There's far more.
Yeah.
So I won't even talk about parent and child leadership. It's just, but at the same time, everybody's different. You are going to have people who need more direction and who actually thrive on understanding the 3 things that you want from them.
Yeah.
Whereas there'll be other people, and you being able to identify, there'll be other people who just give them the freedom to do what you know that they can do. And I don't sit on top of people every day saying, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it's so important and easier said than done, particularly during those tough times. So what was the level of ambition when you started to realize, okay, there was that maybe sense of loneliness and you wanted to create something, and you founded, Charlotte Street Partners. How's the level of ambition changed? I mean, if you use your example from your personal life and that bit of paper in the line,
Yeah.
where are Charlotte Street Partners on that journey now in terms of what you want this business to become and stand for?
It's a really, really good question, because I think I'm probably at a moment now. So we've been around for about 12 years. I would always argue that there's been about 4 iterations of the company in that time. So there was the long period of the time at the beginning we were making it up as we went along. We were lucky that we had Sir Angus Grossart as our chairman.
Yeah, well.
And having somebody like that available to you at all times was just incredible, and I miss him. I miss him a lot. But we completely changed the way the company is run. I think it was 21 into 22. So we'd come through the pandemic. We'd performed, I think, pretty well in really, really difficult circumstances. But we did a sort of top to bottom review of the business and thought, right, we need to, professionalise quite a lot of what we've done. Andrew chose to go and do something different, and I think it was 2022, 23, which was fine. And that was all, that was all agreed. And then I guess for me, first of all, it was about simplifying things and just going back to just being what we can be the best in the market at, which is just sort of, corporate communication, reputation, risk management, public affairs, all that stuff. So not trying to do things that, just because there's a little bit of money available, of course, or something, pretending that you can do it. So just simplifying things, steadying things. And then I would say the last 2-3 years have been the hardest in terms of the market that we've ever faced. So the economy, everybody knows that the world's a bit more chaotic. So everything's a little bit harder, and it's not, I don't say that, to elicit sympathy. It's more just that's just the way it is. And I don't mind that. I think it's just that, and I'm not saying that it was easy at the beginning, but it was economically more stable. The market was more predictable. It's just got a little bit harder, but that's fine. You just adapt, and you just go for it. There's no other way. That I say a lot. You can either, when times get hard, you can either curl into a ball and hope that the worst of the storm passes you by, and you're able to get up at the end of it, or you can just get right into it, and of course, face into it and look for the opportunities. Because there's little moments where on a big Zoom call with a client that runs a private equity business out of the States, and I wouldn't go as far as to say he looked excited about this sort of period of crisis, but he was certainly energized. In every downturn, there are opportunities. Yeah, there's just these little things that you think about.
Where are you on that in terms of scale of 10, level of being content as a founder at the moment?
I think with the business and with the team, I'd be like 9, 8 or 9. I think you're on a journey of continuous improvement. You can always be better tomorrow than you were today. And I'm never ever going to be wholly content. I think I would probably score myself lower than that. I think that we're at a point now where I'm much more reflective right now on what's the entrepreneurial move now. So the entrepreneurial move at the beginning was to set this thing up. With no, real, no certainty that it was going to succeed. So that was that sort of big unknown and a big risk. When you've got young children, family, mortgage, all that stuff, that was a big risk. I didn't really think of it as that at the time because I was just enjoying it so much, and it was a bit of confidence that it would work. And you have to have that, of course. If you ever doubt yourself, then
you've got to be a bit mad.
You definitely do. But also just single-minded. So in terms of we are going to make a success of this. But I'm much more reflective, like right now, on what is the next entrepreneurial move. that we might make, and then further down the line, it's like who succeeds me, who takes it on.
Yeah,
but I want to be part of it forever. I've said that to the team.
Yeah, brilliant.
Whether they like it or not. Shambling about in my slippers.
Yeah. But you get to sit there again. You work with some of the, well, globally, some of the most reputable and well-known companies and logos. But whether it's a small company or companies on that huge enterprise scale, when you sit down and have that first conversation and you're kind of asking questions to discover current state, challenges, opportunities for maybe you to support them, what are the most common themes that you're hearing from organizations that in your world of work that you can support with?
They've always got a challenge of some description, whether it's either policy change or winning a big contract or just changing the way that stakeholders think about them. So there's a commonality there. I wouldn't say there are any. Everybody uses us for something slightly different. I would say, within the parameters of what we do. So there's not. I guess the common theme is just a sense that they need to be better represented in the outside world. They either need to better represent themselves or they need other people to think differently about them. So there's always a specific challenge, but sometimes it can be just hitting a fundraising target or winning that argument or winning a license to build something.
Yeah. I love your example and almost the metaphor of when your house is burning down, you phone the fire brigade.
Yeah.
In your line of work now, how have you seen it kind of shift from almost that proactiveness of companies doing this as almost as risk management and insurance, versus, oh no, we need to phone Malcolm and Charlotte Street Partners because the fire alarm's going off? Like, what's the balance?
There's still an awful lot of organisations, I think, that don't imagine it will happen to them. It always happens to somebody else.
Yeah.
I think the more enlightened ones get it. You build up your reputation over a long period of time and you can lose it in no time at all. But there are still those organisations that will just phone you up usually on a Friday night.
Yeah.
To say, we've got a problem. And and we're always really good at engaging and rising to whatever challenge faces us. I'm not sure what the split is. There's still there's cyber risk's a good example of where, despite the fact that Jaguar Land Rover, Marks and Spencer, there's all these high profile stories of cybercrime, and it's happening all the time. If we're being honest, it's happening all of the time, and sometimes it's independent hackers, sometimes it's 17-year-old guys sitting in their spare room, sometimes it's foreign states that are doing it. There's still too many heads in the sand, I would say, in terms of, are you properly equipped?
Yeah.
Do you understand all of the component parts of your reputation? What are you doing to engage with the outside world? What's your resilience really comes from the strength of the relationships you have.
Yeah.
Beyond just your own organisation. So it's difficult to say what the actual split is, but we still probably see an equal number of on either side. Yeah.
I always think, when you get exposure to different worlds and you're always a lot more alert to it. So, as an example, when I always think in your line of work, you maybe watch the news and when there's celebrity scandals and crisis, I always think then, I wonder what's going on behind the scenes there in terms of what publicist or media manager what phone calls are they fielding? How does that you've obviously seen it both firsthand as well as an advisor, but how does that kind of play out in your mind when you're watching things that are coming across the news and social media?
I don't know. I mean, I try not to overanalyze or critique what you see on the news, because one of the things that drove me mad was reading people's opinions of how we were dealing with crises, because they had no idea what we were actually dealing with. And quite often these were guys that had never been in a crisis. You wouldn't know a crisis if it jumped out of their suit. So I've always been reticent to sort of look in and criticise. But I'm curious about how well prepared were they? Who's advising them? Why did they do that? So there is a bit of, again, just curiosity. And we do, as a team, we sort of, internally we will analyse how's, Marks and Spencer's handled that crisis, their cyber crisis, really, really well. And that's a kind of our unanimous view.
What did they do so well?
Well, I think what they'd done was the brand building over years and years and years, just and the good customer relations and the quality products. So back to that point I made earlier about do the thing that you're there to do really, really well, and that's a large part of it. And then the strength of your relationships and how you engage when things get difficult. As a Marks and Spencer's customer myself, because I'm now at that age where it's at the top of the list. The communication I was getting was really good. I felt I felt informed. But things like like the Beckham stuff that's going on at the moment, I don't spend a huge amount of time wondering what's going on there, because why would you?
It's funny, I had that realization. I said to my wife, I was like, one of two things are happening. I'm either getting old, or Marks and Spencer's got really good, cool stuff in it.
Well, that's my narrative as well, Lewis. I've convinced myself that they've got a really young, cool buyer.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. If you don't mind, I'd love to touch upon Dunblane. You're very proud from there, and I read a piece that you wrote almost 10 years ago now for the 20th anniversary, talking about the flowers of Snowdrops. And I'd love to just, if you don't mind, just talk a little bit around that, what it means to you, and because I'll put an attachment to it under this, but it's an amazing piece and hugely powerful. But I'd love to kind of hear just your thoughts on it and what it means to you.
I think, like most people in the town who are not directly affected by what happened, over a period of time there was a sort of disorder around the way we felt. I couldn't really articulate it. And the piece that I wrote 10 years ago was, it started off as my attempt to just go away myself and write down the way that it made me feel, and the way that it still makes me feel. And I think I say in that piece that I can hardly talk about it, and I find it really, really hard to talk about it. I've talked, I guess, as the years go by, I've opened up a little bit more. But I mean, again, I've talked about the guilt. What right do I have to feel this way about an event that didn't kill any of my children, or relatives, and just struggling with that thought over the years. But I think, it was incredibly tough. Obviously, not necessarily for me, but for the people most directly affected, it was horrific. And it was an attack on our village, our town. Dunblane was a smaller community than it is now. At that point, there was quite a lot of us who had only ever known there. I got moved to Dunblane with my parents when I was 2 years old, so I went to that school. That was my gymnasium. These were all my memories that were being undermined. And I guess what I do with a sort of limited platform that I have is that I make sure that every time the anniversary comes around, that people remember. And social media being social media, pretty much everybody I know on social media that's from Dunblane will change their profile picture to a snowdrop at some point at the beginning of, around the anniversary, and leave it there for a few weeks. And it's just these little things.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the snowdrop piece? Because
Yeah, I mean, the Snowdrop campaign was, it was named after the only flower that was kind of in bloom at that time, and it was, it was a transformative campaign in terms of the changing the gun laws. So from that horrific act, we now have probably the best gun laws anywhere in the world, and nothing like that has happened since. And that was the power. The power behind that campaign was largely the parents of those who were most intimately effective, and it was, and it's an incredible legacy
For sure.
that they've given, the rest of the country. And it's funny. I still feel the same every time I see the first Snowdrops. There's something. And I'm not sure I can articulate how it makes me feel, but it's like a bit of a boom.
Yeah.
There they are again.
Yeah.
It's that time of year again. The way where I walk my dog in the west of Edinburgh, there's a patch of ground that becomes completely covered with them. And I was just out one night last week and I saw them for the first time, and it's you just puts it all back into your mind. Yeah.
You talked in your article about I don't know, I can't remember if you used the responsibility or the class of the media the day of the funerals.
Yeah.
And which is really interesting because the media get bashed a lot, and but talk a little bit around the way they acted that day, and how you refer to them off the back of that.
I think they showed they showed an enormous amount of kind of self-awareness, I guess. So they came into the town in huge numbers. I write in that article about coming out of the cathedral, one or maybe the following day, there'd been a big service in the cathedral, came out of the cathedral, and just remember just being astonished at the number of journalists and photographers and camera crews that were there, and just kind of that sense that this was the whole world was watching. And then and I don't know how it happened, but there was a request made to the media that they just left before the funerals started, and they did. I mean, there was a few stragglers, as there always will be, but en masse they left, and I think that was that was the right thing to do. The other thing that I've argued, I've had conversations with editors over the years, is the use of the image of the individual that was responsible. There's no need. These people do those things to haunt communities. There's no need for that, the image of that man, to be seen anywhere. And I've had conversation with the editors where they've basically said, well, look, we're editorially free to do what we can see fit, but certainly around the 20th anniversary I made a bit of a fuss about that, and maybe I was looking for it, but I didn't notice as many as there might have been, and I'll probably do it again for the 30th anniversary, because there are so many more ways of remembering what happened in Dunblane than having to look at that.
Having got to know you over the last year or so, you're incredibly purpose-led, values-led, and have a huge focus on social impact as well. You're obviously the chair of Street Soccer Scotland, and also UNICEF UK as well. Is it
UNICEF Scotland?
UNICEF Scotland. Talk to me a little bit around that, and why both those charities are so important to you, and that bigger picture of the social impact and your purpose.
I think the first role I did like that was I was asked to be on the development board of Barnado's years and years ago, and it hadn't really crossed my mind to do anything like that. And the development board was basically a fundraising organisation, and it was really good. There's some great people there, but I got a sense that I found when I was doing that work and hearing about the challenges that organisation faced and the people that needed that organisation faced, that I don't know, I just think we all owe it to society to just put a bit back in, not just take. So I get an enormous amount out of the work that I do with street soccer, which is largely governance. David gets all he gets all the good stuff, hanging about with all the celebs, and but to be fair to him, he's built this thing from nothing.
Yeah.
And he's an utterly remarkable guy, and I've learned a lot from him, and I hope he learns bits and pieces from me about how to dot the I's and cross the T's. And it's the same with UNICEF. It's just, but it's about perspective as well. So it's, first of all, you feel that you're making a difference, and that you're positively impacting the lives of people that don't necessarily have a voice. So I think growing up in a political family, I didn't want to be a politician. I was quite clear about that. I'd seen politics from a different angle, didn't like it as much, didn't think that's not really for me. Don't have the temperament. I mean, I'd be getting chucked out of the House of Commons every other day, I would have thought. So this is as close to politics as I get. I get the opportunity. I've got a platform to say things and do things and help these organisations achieve what they want to achieve, in a different way. But also just it's a perspective thing. So it's about being able to step out of the day to day and imagine that whatever I might think is a problem over there isn't actually a problem. You know, what's a problem is not knowing where your next meal's coming from, not knowing if you're going to be able to pay the bills. And that's what being part of these organisations gives me. And I'll be there up until the point that they feel that I'm useful to them. But I think it's just something that people should do.
Yeah.
And
that's brilliant. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's that bigger sense of why you do what you do, and being able to have that sense of perspective, and you kind of realize that day to day when you're running businesses or part of a business, you tend to be, although in the moment it's the big stuff, you are sweating the small stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Particularly the topic we've just talked about is almost a real realization of it's not important in the grand scheme of things.
There are lots of things that matter. There's a smaller number of things that matter really when you boil it down than the things that don't.
Yeah.
So it's quite a lot of the stuff that we all get uptight about that doesn't actually matter.
I know.
And I've got one of the best leaders I ever worked with was a guy called Stephen Baxter at BAA. He ran the Scottish airports, and then for a short period he was the chief operating officer for the whole company. And he's still one of my best pals, and he's from the Gorbals originally. Boy, like the boy's done well. And he can turn the Gorbals up and turn it down. And when I was having some of these, I've been having conversations with him a few years ago about frustrations and this and that and the next thing, and he just kept saying, doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. And then, like, for God's sake, write yourself a list. So I've still got a notebook that's all about me and personal reflections, and just, when I say all about me, it's not like, full of, I did this amazing thing. It's much more the things that I've learned, the reflections, but on the left-hand side of the page, write down all the things that really matter to you. And then on the right-hand side of the page, all the things that you're getting uptight about that don't actually matter. And the list of things that don't matter is about 4 or 5 times as long as the one that of the things that do. And once you get that perspective, it just changes. It kind of changes everything.
Totally.
Just like that. Yeah. That doesn't.
It's funny though, the power of writing things down.
Yeah.
And just taking some of that noise out your head.
Yeah.
And just simplifying it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I prepare a lot for events. If I'm speaking at an event, I don't necessarily want to just read out some kind of a speech. I'll write it all out.
Yeah.
And then I'll maybe just have it there as a sort of crutch.
Yeah.
But I tend not to need it because in the process of writing it down, I've remembered it. Maybe I should have thought about that when I was doing my hire.
Yeah. Listen, Malcolm, we're going to finish with a few quickfire questions. They're not too quickfire, so just don't worry if you want to elaborate. But we've started the Leaders Unlocked library. So what I'd love to ask is, what's one book, or it could be a podcast or a resource that's impacted you the most that you'd like to add to our library?
Alex Ferguson's book about leading. I just loved it. So it is. Perfect. And I didn't see
didn't
that.
rehearse that.
I didn't see that when I came in. So it's already in your library. It's one of these books where I don't think I've ever read it cover to cover, but it's one of these books where I've got placeholders in at different points, and I just think he was a remarkable leader. I was always fascinated by what made these people, and it was men like Bill Shankly, Jock Stein, Matt Busby, Alex Ferguson, and it was they were born into hard environments, real life, real
Correct, yeah.
lived experience, but somehow they had this sixth sense when it came to being leaders of teams. And Ferguson was just remarkable, the way he would lead a team, he would then dismantle a team, and then he would create another one, and he did it over and over again. And I watched him being interviewed by Hazel Irvine at a street soccer event a few years ago, and she asked him a question at one point about how the team that's won everything, how on earth do you motivate them to go again the following season? And he looked at her as if she had two heads, and she'd asked the most ridiculous question, and he just, with that, look on his face, the old press conference where he used to say to people, "You're testing my patience."
Yeah.
He would never have said that to Hazel Irvine, but he looked like he'd lost his patience. And he just said, "Well, how do you not?"
Yeah.
In any walk of life, when you have a success, you don't just say, "Well, that's it,
Yeah.
job done." So it was the relentlessness, but also just little bits about, that you will always have people who are up, and you'll have people who are down, and it's the job of people who are up to lift the people
Yeah, I love that.
who are down. So just little things, but also just, if I had a guy over here that had bags of talent but the wrong attitude, and I had a guy here who had sort of limited talent but absolutely a grafter, I'd want that guy every day of the week. And I think just little things like that. So that book, I know you're trying to do quick fire.
No, that's great. Are great leaders born, or can they be developed?
I think so. I think both. I think how do you know that somebody's going to be as good a leader as they can? So I think it's about, I suppose they can be. Yeah, they have to be, but they just emerge over time, don't they?
Sure. If you could go for a coffee with one leader and pick their brains, who would it be, and what would you ask?
It would be Alex Ferguson.
Yeah.
And it would just be about that. How do you keep going?
Yeah, unbelievable.
Then,
what's your most important non-negotiable as a leader?
It's a really non-negotiable. Togetherness.
Love that. Really like that.
One team.
What's one word that defines your leadership style?
This is my opinion.
Yes. I'll come to others in the last question.
Relaxed.
Nice. When you're leading a team, which behaviour are you least tolerant of?
Undermining colleagues.
Really good. What's the most underrated leadership quality in your eyes?
Being relaxed, I think.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly. What three words were your teammates, colleagues, or counterparts used to describe you?
I ask this question in almost every interview of other people, and then when it's thrown back at me, I think of all of the answers that they have given over the years that I've then gone away and thought,
yeah,
either that's absolutely brilliant or that's the opposite. I would say that they see me as being supportive, engaged, and driven.
Great. Who are two people that you've had the biggest influence on you, both as a person and as a leader?
So the guy I mentioned there, Stephen Baxter, a bit of both actually, in terms of personal stuff, and because we became really good friends. We were colleagues, and in the hierarchy, he was my boss. But certainly in terms of leadership, he's the best. He's the best people manager I've ever worked with, and that was something that I studied. And then when it's thrown back at me, I think of all of the answers that they have given over the years that I've then gone away and thought, either that's absolutely brilliant or that's the opposite. So I would probably say he was the most influential, and then I would have to say, like, my wife is the hardest worker I've ever come across in terms of just graft, day in, day out. And she's she's slightly older than me. She'll kill me for saying that, but she's studying to be a nurse.
Amazing.
Just a complete handbrake turn on her career, and I'm going to be a nurse. And then she just goes for it. And I'm constantly saying to my two younger boys who are still at home, that's the work ethic.
Yeah, unbelievable.
That is the work ethic to which you should aspire.
Yeah.
So
phenomenal. What's the best team environment you've been a part of?
This one, the one that I'm in right now.
Great.
I've been in some great team environments. I think we've worked really hard over the years in terms of culture. So there's lots of cliches there in all the books about how culture's more important than anything else, but it's just true, and it has to be true if you think about it. It's common sense. Like, quite a lot of leadership is just common sense, I think. But I think the team that we have at the moment, we have really good fun, but we do brilliant work.
Yeah.
So the quality of the output is as good as it's ever been, and we've got each other's back. So togetherness is one of our values. It was the only one that I was really adamant was in there. So the rest of the creating the values was a democratic sort of big team engagement discussion. And it's not to say that there were people arguing against togetherness, but I wanted it to be explicit that we're all in the same boat. And some days we'll be up, some days we'll be down, but keep going.
Brilliant. If you could go back and have a 5-minute conversation with that 15-year-old, so you walk into the Scouts Hall, what would you say to him?
Get your finger out.
Would you?
Aye, belt up. Yeah. Stop being a dick. It's as simple as that. You know what? I think the last school conversation I went to, I basically said, I started off by saying, here's my career journey, right, in a line. Started work at 17 because I didn't give myself any other options because I was a dick when I was your age. And I got a bit of attention, but it was true. I mean, so it would definitely be that. It'd be just to be a bit kinder to the people that are around you, and get your finger out and work hard. Foundation of, and I say this to my boys, that unless you win the Euro Millions, working hard is the foundation of every successful leadership story that exists, or every successful business story or sporting story. It's hard work. For sure.
Final question. What's the best piece of advice you've received that you'd like to pass on to our audience?
I think so. This is a piece of advice that was passed to me via my dad. So it was a guy called Alex Robertson, and people of a certain generation will remember this guy. He was like a company doctor. He would go in and fix big companies and work for Stackis, and Sir Alex Robertson. And I was lucky enough to just have a bit of a relationship with him towards the end of his life, where I was able to phone him occasionally and ask him for little bits of wisdom. But he'd said to my dad, and my dad passed it down to me, always ask for all of the tools that you need to do your job, because you will only ever be judged on outputs. And so I say that again, I say to the people that work with me, you must ask me for all of the things that will facilitate great outputs.
Yeah.
So if you got all of the, and sometimes it can be if you got all of the tech equipment that you need to succeed. But it was just, and again, quite a lot of the advice I give to clients is that you can have an unbelievably beautiful strategy, really compelling, but if it just sits on a shelf, you don't actually do anything. When the chickens come home to roost, you don't have the outputs. You haven't actually done anything, so you haven't achieved anything. So I think that
it's great.
It's just something that I think about quite a lot. We're all only ever judged on the outputs.
For sure. Malcolm, thank you very much for joining this morning.
Pleasure.
Thank you.